I know you're tired of the usual drama that you've seen on your feed recently. So let's switch gears. How's Aston Martin doing? Are they any closer to be getting Fernando Alonso his 33rd victory in Formula 1? Right. Well, about that. 2026 is a very important year for Fernando Alonso. He's made it very clear that should that year's car turn out to be one that's incapable of producing a title challenger, basically another dud, yet another one to add to its collection, he will retire from Formula 1 for real this time. No backsies. Yes, of course, he'll become a brand ambassador for Aston Martin, but what will that even mean? That will probably mean he'll most likely just don a special coloured cap and just knock around most of the Grand Prix anyway, so what's the actual difference? Well, the difference he won't be in a car, and that'll be still really extremely weird to process after, what, just over a quarter of a century of him in the sport? He's been around that long. But the main thing that people are really curious about is whether or not Aston Martin can actually get him his 33rd victory, since they came so close in 2023. If only Fernando managed to secure pole around Monaco, he might have been able to do it. According to an interview Newey conducted with F1 Insider, where they likened him to Gyro Gearloose, yes, we're talking about the Donald Duck Cinematic Universe's eccentric inventor, and I'm really confused by it. Then I remembered it was a German site, and Donald Duck is really big in Europe. I have Finnish nephews, by the way, and they were raised on Donald Duck. But regardless to the duck analogy, here is what Adrian said specifically for your consideration as to where the team is right now. I had a weekend off recently, but apart from that, it's been pretty much flat out all the way. When I enter such a phase of intense concentration, I barely notice anything to the left or right. All my computing power is channeled toward one goal: designing a fast racing car. Oh, you can understand why Max and Adrian got on like a house on fire. You're practically always playing catch-up. Until March, little had been done here for 2026. A little, of course, but we've had a huge amount of work to do since then. Today, the pressure's even greater because the cars have become more complex and development times have increased. On the one hand, we don't have enough time, and on the other, our simulation tools may be a bit weak, so we have to try to make the best possible assessments. Now, the immediate thing to note from that particular passage is that the team had barely touched the 2026 regulations when he set foot on campus around March the 1st, and you're just thinking, my God! Maybe this might explain why the 2023 drop-off stung so much, because the 2026 prep was shelved to probably patch said car after it went off course around Canada, and then when the 2024 car spiraled after Imola, they had to put loads of time and effort to correct that too. There were so many calamities afoot, which meant that probably by the time they had to stop, seemingly, barely anything was done concerning the new regulations. And when I mean stop, that's when F1 and the FIA set an embargo that no more 2026 development could be undertaken before January the 1st of this year. So probably by the time that embargo was established, Aston Martin were like, where car? Where car? Now, of course, that's only a hunch, but given what that team's had to go through since 2023 when they really took off and many people were actually starting to think that, hey, this Aston Martin project might actually work, there are now at least some groundings to think, okay, that makes a little bit of sense. And maybe why Fernando should be a little bit excited that at last there might be an opportunity for next year. Or hey, at the very least, he's just glad that somebody is on the case, because if Adrian had not been around and Dan Fallows was still on the case, then, yeah, I probably would be thinking that Fernando would be saying bye-bye to Formula 1. So, yeah, that might not happen, folks. Because Adrian Newey's own words makes it clear that he's gone into tunnel vision, something of which his own wife has also called a design trance, since he feels the team is playing catch-up. It's most likely one of the biggest undertakings he's had to do in his entire career. In that same piece, he recalled that in-between phase when he was going from Williams to McLaren, he had time to sketch out ideas that could be used on the MP4 machine, since the regulations were not either going to change too much, or the FIA had made the 98 tweaks public well ahead of time. At Red Bull, when compared to McLaren, there was far less pressure to be had. They were just grateful that Adrian was in the room. He arrived at a midfield team that were very much beginning their rebuilding phase after the Jaguar project from Ford failed. It took them quite a few years to get up to speed, because let's not forget, just because Adrian Newey arrived and the RB3 was introduced, that wasn't a really fast car from the get-go. There were still some very big pains with that particular thing, and that was down due to process. Yeah, it took him a couple of years to get his eye in, but by 2009 it was all looking gravy, because amidst the Brawn feel-good story, Red Bull was second in the constructors. Let's not forget that. But at Aston Martin, oh no, it's far more pressured than in any stint of Adrian Newey's career thus far. It's panic stations over there. And the team is heavily relying on his experience to make up for lost ground. So it's people just going, "Thank God you've arrived, Master Adrian. It's been an absolute mess down here." And hey, at least Adrian's stimulated enough to be able to get into one of those design trances. We're not going to be seeing a Adrian Newey where he's going to phone this in. No, this is a challenge he's not had to deal with before, so I am full of confidence now. He's going to be giving it his all, and Aston Martin will at least have a fairly decent car starting off, and will continue to develop. You also hear encouraging words from team principal Andy Cowell, who said things have definitely sped up with Adrian around and every single part of the car is getting his attention. Everything. Nevertheless, Cowell does admit that the team is still catching up to other teams who have been more open about committing to 2026. And what I do sense from Adrian's words is that he does have a plan, and he is prioritising key parts of the car that need to be pinned down for the season before it starts, because they're either parts which you can't change at all during the season, or, if you can, like the suspension, it would require major work being undertaken on other parts. Because if you've been watching F1 for a couple of years, you might notice that some upgrades take a little bit longer to get through the pipeline than others. That might explain why the Ferrari upgrade has actually managed to turn many heads as to thinking, wow, that's a pretty big upgrade, I hope that actually works. Because, you know, suspension dictates how the tyres get down on the ground, innit? The pressure that Adrian and Andy are talking about is real, as is the case for every other team, but for Aston Martin especially, there is even more pressure given how much progress they have made in just a couple of years, because let's not forget, just a couple of seasons ago, around the time they became Aston Martin, they were still operating out of the old Jordan Force India facilities. They've had to take on rapid expansion since then, and, to give them credit, they've nailed it. They've now got a wind tunnel that is now coming online, so bravo to them for actually getting it off the ground. Say what you will about the Stroll family, they actually made this work. But it's not a perfect execution. There are still, according to the articles from Adrian Newey and Aston Martin, growing pains in relation to the simulator. Basically, it's simply not good enough for Adrian's taste, and in order to calibrate it properly, it could take up to 2 years, although I think Cowell has said that maybe it might be a little bit less than that, but either way, you're not probably going to be seeing a fully optimised workflow from Aston Martin until the season after next. And let's make one thing clear. Like over at Red Bull, Adrian Newey is not going to be the silver bullet that cures Aston Martin of all of its problems, but it might provide them the direction and the guidance they need to be able to do things better. And I still attest, I still believe down to the core of my very soul and my very ladder that those lunchtime conversations that he had with the AMR25 team, even though they were very, very small, just basically little chatter and banter, did something to those upgrades. Just some little thing. And they've also got a spa package coming, so, you know, let's pay attention to see what Aston Martin can do this weekend. Might be something a little bit better, or maybe makes their points tally a little bit more solid. Because ever since that Emilia-Romagna upgrade, they have got a car which can score points fairly consistently. And had it not been for that Monaco engine going bang in Fernando's car, he would have more points than Lance Stroll, and Aston Martin would very much be in contention with Sauber for 6th place in the Constructors, which, given where they started the year, that's not a bad recovery for Aston Martin in of itself, and especially considering that this is a year where they are thinking about infrastructure and it's not really been much of a priority. So, you know, bonus. And it just makes me think even more that with Adrian just being there, breathing the same air as some technicians and designers, it's enough to lift everybody up. Many people really keen to prove themselves in front of such an illustrious Donald Duck character. Sorry about that, I just couldn't get that comparison out of my head. It's just so random, but yet so logical. And let's not forget one important motivator, people. Adrian Newey isn't just some guy who is the technical director like many of his other job descriptions in the past. He's also, effectively, the day-to-day operator of the Aston Martin Formula One team. Newey's now in charge of hiring and firing whoever he wants. Papa Stroll was so desperate for success, he's like, I don't care what you do, Adrian, just give me success! And I'm pretty sure he's going to do that, because he does have that power to be able to make people come and make people go. A level of autonomy he's never had before in his entire 30, 40 year plus career. And it does make me think that some staff members will rise to the occasion to be working alongside such a giant of the sport, and then others may quietly bow out just thinking, I can't compete with this, or no, I'm out of it, bye. But I do think there are going to be more people that will be willing to put up with this than those who won't at Aston Martin, because this is just the vibe I'm getting from this team. That sure, their car this year is not performing all that well, but they're hopeful for the future. Because next year's rules bring smaller, lighter cars, active aero, and a 50-50 split between engine and battery power, all of which raise complexity and lengthen development cycles, which makes Adrian's revelation on how behind this team was in development all the more alarming. And then Aston also has to integrate a brand new power unit from Honda, amidst understanding all of the other changes being brought to the car. Although having said that, according to early noises from the team, they said that the chassis engine integration is actually going quite smoothly, and that Honda power unit is slotting in brilliantly. So put simply, what Adrian Newey is telling us all is that the process of integrating into Aston Martin has been akin to triage. He's finding exactly where he needs to go within the entire Aston Martin widget and optimize it based on priority. Get the fundamentals right first, and then do all of the ancillary stuff that little bit later, things that can easily be corrected over the course of a season. So, you know, get the powertrain, get the monocoque right, get the suspension right, and then when it comes to the bodywork, yeah, okay, it might be decent at the beginning, but you can easily learn a thing or two when you actually do some active racing. But I do think that once the architecture is sorted and they get their simulator correlation down pat, Aston Martin could really fly. And it might mean that if Max Verstappen does eventually leave Red Bull, if he chooses to, then Aston Martin could easily be a port of call, because I believe Max actually made some comments that he could maybe stay within F1 beyond 2028, saying that he now is considering maybe 35, maybe 36. Who knows what's been going on behind the scenes with Verstappen, but maybe this has actually given him a little bit more love and passion for Formula 1. Maybe he likes where things are going after all. Maybe Red Bull have cracked something. We don't know. That's all spanner of speculation things for now. But the point is, though, is that Aston Martin, I think they've got something. And I think they kind of have to, because they know all too well, if they start off on the back foot, Fernando's not going to be a happy bunny and will eventually leave them. He will retire for good, and therefore they're going to have to pick a brand new driver to be their team leader. And amidst 2026, if that car doesn't turn out to be good, it's going to be such an annoying distraction for Fernando, because the journalists will just not stop asking him, "You're planning to retire then, Fernando? Oh, the car's not good, Fernando. You're planning to retire? Hey, you going to retire, Fernando? 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 You going to retire, Fernando? Banana!" Because again, Aston Martin are in a similar place where Red Bull were circa 2006, and it took them and Newey a few years to get it all clicked into place. Now okay, the regulation change opportunity is a lot sooner than it was back in the 2000s, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the team will nail it right out of the gate, since, well, they're starting from a weakened place, as revealed in the earlier comments. But luckily for the Spaniard, the team's management is a lot more focused on getting down and dirty with the technical side of things, rather than spending most of their time placating the boss's son in front of the world. Most of the time we heard news from Aston Martin, it was Mike Crack just telling everyone, "Hey, just cool down about Lance Stroll, stop being mean about the guy. This guy's a technical engineer, Mike Crack. Let's not forget that. He honed his craft with Bumawa. He knows a thing or two when it comes to running a car, but then most of the time he was having to play damage control with Lance." I can easily imagine for him it must have been a real pain instead of actually getting down to the nitty-gritty. But fortunately with Andy Cowell, we've heard much less of that. We've heard some, but nowhere near as much as we had the last couple of years. According to Cowell's comments recently on the Racer website, it all boils down to speeding up learning. He's not celebrating a single breakthrough part, no. Whilst that is nice to experience, one win does not win the war in his mind, which is very similar to Newey. Which does fill me with hope that as the team gains more staff, or the staff they've got gain more experience, those acquisitions will be like-minded, and thusly the drive for perfection will be even more motivated. And two gains matter most in his eyes. First of all, sharper management, which means that what they do see in the data is stuff that they'll be able to trust, which again goes back to Newey's desire in fixing the simulator. That they can just look at the numbers and go, right, we are going to believe that's exactly what will happen on track, and when they get the car on track, oh, the numbers match. And second, the ability to be able to run tasks whenever they want to, which is exactly what they can do with the wind tunnel around their home factory, which is now fully activated. And look at what happened with McLaren when they got their own local wind tunnel up and running. They have been going gangbusters. Overall, I think what's going on at Aston Martin, aside from all of the technical developments and getting some really swanky facilities, it's been a culture change. Something that I think Red Bull is about to go through and will be going through for the next year or two, but it's all down to just a sense of optimism that, yeah, it's been a rough couple of years where they thought they managed to get their ducks in a row in 2023, but then realised it was a false dawn. And now they might be in a place where, yeah, we can actually think strongly again. Because I believe they are rotating to a point where they can really truly reach maximum velocity. I mean, it's happening already, even just after a couple of months, because the team looked so glum at the start of the season, and then reaching a crescendo, well, actually lowest there, but around Miami, where they got really close to having a third place in the sprint, but then they had loads of pit stop strategic maladies, and then in the race itself, they were absolutely nowhere. And you just sense that everyone within that team is fired up. They're keen to prove themselves. They're relishing the challenge in being able to learn things from this year to then bring into next year, and then maybe the year after that, they can really be going for the title. Which is in step with what the boss Papa Stroll wants, as well as Aston Martin's top banana in Adrian Newey. And speaking of Stroll, as I laid out in my Lance Stroll video the other day, is that I just feel like his overall aura is not in step with what the team wants and where it's going. I'm not talking about Lance being a bad driver. Loads of other videos have been talking about that. That's not the point. I'm talking about more about where his headspace is and whether he's truly committed to be able to be held up to task like everyone else is willing to be put up to task. Of course, as some of you pointed out in the comments, Lance was right to feel mad about losing out on a potential podium around Silverstone due to the car's limitations, but his post-race comments were not commiserating or focusing on the positives, because there were quite a few, but instead he was just labelling the car as the worst he had ever driven. Wow, mate, even worse than that FW41 that finished dead last in your sophomore year? Bit dramatic, mate. But it does raise a fair question. Is Lance's energy becoming a liability as the team evolves into a serious, polished outfit? Now, you might be thinking that I'll immediately be going like, nah, Lance, get him out! Well, yeah, I get it. Lance is a bit of a misery guts at the moment. He is a puddle of pessimism at the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that pessimism doesn't have its uses. It's kind of like a safety valve in a way, because sure, Aston Martin is currently filled with optimists at the moment, and it's nice to have that level of positivity, but sometimes you might need a skeptic or two amongst them to point out things that said optimists might overlook. As long as Lance's feedback is clear and detailed and pragmatic, then all will be fine. He can be as miserable as he wants to be. But right now, I'm just not sensing that, because the feedback that we do get, at least to us in the public, is just, yeah, the car is just slow, I don't know why, Dad! Which Lance has done multiple times this season, and at one point he was like, I don't know, ask Fernando or something, I don't know. But if he's a little bit more chatty in private and his feedback is actually helpful and useful to the engineers, the relevant parties, then okay, it doesn't matter what he tells us in the public. Except in a way in terms of actually being able to G up the fans and the sponsors, the ones who actually see the televisual broadcast. Because if you get one driver, Fernando Alonso, saying that, oh yeah, things are difficult, but we're on the up and up, and then the other guy's just going like, it's like, yay. If he is just as mopey with engineers, it may cause him to second-guess bolder concepts or slow decisions to avoid more negativity. Especially if Papa Stroll's boy is fat. You might argue that Fernando's feedback would be more important given his experience, but this car is meant to be built for 2 drivers instead of 1. Red Bull would like to remember that in their post-Horner era. But regardless of the backroom mutterings, the public pessimism that we can see does drag brand energy away when sponsors and staff are trying to believe that next year will actually work out and their money has been well spent. Especially the likes of Honda and Aramco, who have really dedicated themselves to the Aston Martin bit, them eschewing themselves from any other team that could maybe provide them with more instant success, especially off the back of Honda saying that there is no chance they are going to be getting back into bed with Red Bull anytime soon. That may be the rumours that they could come back and provide Red Bull some customer Honda engines. No, that was completely ruled out. Honda ain't doing that. And then with Aramco, with the backing of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, them putting all of their eggs into the Aston Martin basket, you might think I'm being unfair regarding Lance, and if he were just a typical driver with no family ties in the team, then you'd have every right to be correct that I am being unfair. But you got to remember, him being the boss's dad means that his negativity causes even bigger ripples than maybe even Fernando's negativity if he's feeling down in the dumps. People within might read Lance's sadness as what the leadership really thinks. It all depends whether or not the staff has a means to maybe tune out what Lance is saying, or maybe translate it into other things, that maybe if he's saying something really bad, it doesn't actually mean that, it might mean something else, and they can work around it that way. But look, it all depends on what's going on behind the scenes. If Lance is a lot more chirpy with people that he doesn't actually have to be in front of a camera with, then okay. But right now, we are not quite sure of that. As for Fernando, he's keeping a level head. tinged with a little bit of excitement for finally getting to work with the man he considered his biggest rival in his career, which has spanned a quarter of a century. Again, it's just so wild. And Alonso is echoing the comments of the engineers and says the whole team is learning from Newey's wider view of how a top outfit should run. That, to me, shows that Fernando values team culture just as much as performance figures and overall car performance, that it's good to have the atmosphere within the team being positive. And we saw at McLaren when it was really, really negative. It did drag Fernando down, and then he got mad, which dragged everyone else down. It was just a vicious cycle with that guy. If it's positive, then it can keep him tempered. Sure, we know Fernando for exactly that. Angry radio chatter that has now become meme-worthy. It's part of meme legend within the F1 community. But amidst all of that, it wasn't down to him just being mean for the sake of it. No. He is, in his own special way, trying to motivate the team in order to do better. Those comments are him wanting something more. Whereas with Lance, you just don't get the sense it's motivational. You don't really see that inspirational take from the Canadian. Instead, you just see the frustration, and then that's it. In fact, you can argue it's bordering apathy. But we're not talking about Lance anymore. Alonso's framing the rest of the season as preparation for next season, even though the team has teased one more upgrade for Spa, which might further build upon their notable earlier package. Expectations are high, yes, but he expects to keep his feet on the ground, which does seem to be the overall tone from the team. They're somewhat realistic with their circumstances, but they are hopeful that things can happen. Look, to me, Aston Martin's 2026 plans no longer hinge on them coming up with some genius ideas, because I'm quite sure they got plenty of those in the pipeline already. It's all about execution, to make sure that those genius ideas get implemented properly, efficiently, and timely. Because it's all very well and good Newey comes up with some novel idea that is a complete game changer that no other team has actually managed to innovate or even discover was a thing. But if the processes with the wind tunnel and the simulator can't produce the ideal results and you just get some half-baked concoction, then what good is that? And then ideally, you would want to get those sketches from Newey into the wind tunnel and through the processes regularly, consistently providing results, instead of just getting it done one time right, and then the rest of it, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But one thing that's filling me with hope is that all the big players at Aston Martin are singing from the same hymn sheet. Andy and Adrian, they're together in their operations and their ideals and their expectations and what they're pleased with. It's all really looking gravy for this team. They may not be the most popular team out there for many reasons, but at the very least, the people who are working within that team are very much behind one goal, and that they are all very, very talented people who want to work together, and they want the best for the team that has employed them. And also, much to my relief, Lance's happiness is not top priority. Now, of course, I'm not talking about making them absolutely depressed. No. But they are not going to be putting the team's integrity on the line just to make sure that Lance is happy and that his dad is happy. They want to win. Everyone in that team wants to win. And they are going to do anything possible in order to achieve it. And hey, if he can end up scoring well next year, then that's all good too. But one thing is absolutely clear, they need to provide an infrastructure that will last the test of time, long after Newey retires and can last for several decades, because what became really clear at Red Bull is that once Adrian Newey departed and he was no longer involved in the daily, it all crumbled really quickly within the span of a few months, and it's going to take a while for them to be able to rebuild properly without Adrian anywhere within the workflow. So yes, Aston Martin have given them the tools, now they just got to let him cook. And so far, the dish is looking very, very promising, and the key for Aston Martin right now is just to allow Adrian to continue to build his ideal kitchen. Another thing that is in process of building or rebuilding itself is what's going on over at Haas. Esteban Ocon and company are coming up with something rather wholesome. To find out why I am so convinced that Ocon's move to Haas was one of the best moves of his entire career, watch this video next, straight after this one.